Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to make this little lady slipper style orchid flower using ribbon, our Flower Comb Ribbon Ruching tools, the Victoria set, and some ribbon and some paint. So let's get started. The first thing that you'll need is some ribbon. This is a 25mm wide ribbon. I've chosen it for the color. It's from my stash. It's not the highest quality ribbon that I have in my stash. It's just an ordinary polyester satin ribbon. You will also need our new Flower Comb Ribbon Ruching tools. This is the Victoria set. So the Victoria set is number 29 and number 20. And we're actually going to use both of these to create this flower. So we'll start with number 20. Okay. Now I need to leave a little bit of a space at one end because we want to have some excess anytime that you're working any of the flower comb flowers. You do want to make sure that you give yourself a little bit of excess, not least because a lot of these ribbons can fray quite a bit. I'm just going to go around one repeat of 20 and side A. Okay, I'll just set that aside for a moment. I'm using one of those pens that sort of can be erased or whatever. It doesn't really matter. I'm using this so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. Usually I actually use a pencil, but an air erasable pen is a good option. So the next thing we need to do is take 29B and then, yep, wrong way around. That's the way around. And basically what I want is this repeat. So, but I also want the space either side of it. Now this repeat is what is going to create the little slipper of the flower. So I'm going to go ahead and draw around this. So I've got the repeat and then I've got the two spaces either side, and that's so that we can create the petal with the slipper. We're going to now repeat another one of these large patterns, and then for the small petal I'm going to flip this around so that this straight edge is on this straight edge, and I'm going to have a repeat. I'm going to have one of the triangles either side of this shape, and so this will give me a little bit of space, and it also, all of these little repeat parts create like a small, like smaller petal bits. Okay, so that is our basic pattern in order to create the lady slipper. So now we have to start the ruching. I'm using a needle threaded up with ordinary sewing thread. It is, as you can see, threaded up singly. I'm going to start over at this end. And the first thing in this space, I'm just going to do straight stitches up to the repeat. First thing to do is start off with a good strong back stitch. Knots are really not the thing to do when you're doing this, because a knot can pull through when you're pulling tight. So just do a little test and make sure that that's nice and pulled through. Okay, and then I'm going to stitch along the lines. for this particular design, stitches, basic running stitches of about 4 millimeters will work really nicely. You don't want to have your stitches too small. If they're too small, it's really difficult to gather the thread up. And if they're too long, then you kind of miss the point of having the unusual shapes in the repeat in the first place. Now, any sort of point, try to make sure that your needle enters through at that point. It will just help to define the pattern, because again, part of the point of using the tools and excuse me, using the tools and using the different designs on the tools is because the placement of your stitches will help you to get some really unusual shapes. And you'll notice my Yubanuki on my finger. I've got a little bit of a gardening calyx, and I just thought that, you know, a plaster looked really kind of ugly. So now you don't have to look at my rough skin, and you don't have to look at a plaster either. I'm just going to carry on through. I'll show you the back of this so that you can see. As you can see, I'm using a dark thread, and I am actually using this dark thread so that you can see it. And when I turn over, you will be able to see what I mean and why I've used it. But with the ribbon ruching, I mean, ideally, if you can use a matching thread, that's great. But if you're using polyester ribbons, sometimes the colors are actually quite difficult to match. A neutral is really the best option. Now, when I say neutral, it is best if you can get something that's kind of like along the lines. So with the yellow, I would normally use a beige, a brown, something like that. But what you have to remember is that the ruching is in the shadows. You're gathering up the textile, be it a ribbon or fabric. And so those points are going to be literally in the shadow. And so really, you probably won't see them at all. And that's why I'm not worried about using this dark thread, so that you can see what I'm doing. And of course, it does mean that, you know, you're not going to have any sort of real eye strain or anything as well. So carry on down the length of that, and I'll just turn over and show you. So you see, that's why I've used the darker thread, so that you can actually see what it is that I did. And now I'm going to start gathering it up. So I'm just going to pull on the thread and gently take the ribbon up. Now, there's our first petal formed. Now for the center petal, because we want the slipper to form, I am going to stick my thumb in there so that the slipper forms on this side. Okay, because it will sort of naturally form anyways, but if we can manipulate which side, and I like to sort of gather up from the back, the other side from where I have marked up. Don't know why, I just do. So I'm going to gather that up quite tightly. And then I'm going to work some back stitches here at this end so that that gathering does not come undone. Okay, so now we have this thing with two petals up at the top. There's a couple of little petal-like things. There's the slipper, which is this, folded back on itself. And then that little extra petal is right here. So now I want to take that and twist it round so that basically we're taking the two ends and we're going to connect those together, okay? Because what we want is we want that slipper to come out at the front, and we want that little extra petal to end up at the top. So let me show you this again without my fingers fumbling in the way, hopefully. So hold that end, twist this one around so that you've got that shape, okay? And then now I'm going to just quite simply stitch the two ends together to hold that shape. And this is where obviously a matching thread or a lighter neutral is helpful. But even now, it isn't going to be vital because of the next couple of steps that we're going to take. And I'm not doing anything particularly tidily. I'm just stitching these together so it's nice and tight. Now what you can do is you can stitch this and anchor it a little bit to the top petal and at the center as well. And this will just help to give you a little bit more shape at the front. You see, that's just forming the shape there, okay? So I can see that that could be a bit of a hole there if I let it. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure those two little petals are up. And then I can come back around and just make a little anchoring stitch through these gathers, and that will help to just keep the flower together. Otherwise you can run the risk of a lopsided flower. Now if you're going to make I mean there's lots of lady slipper orchids in the world. Sorry, my needle's just come undone. And so of course there's lots of options to how you might do this, and you might want to put other types, you know, like a stamen or whatever inside of there, and you can just take that right through the center. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to stick the end of the pen into the slipper part and just puff that out a little so we can get a really true picture of what that's going to look like. Okay, so that's not too bad. Trim off just a little bit of that excess ribbon where it's raveling. So now we're going to go ahead and make the calyx. Now the calyx, we need a bit of green ribbon. Now the traditional way of measuring ribbon in sort of your Victorian 1920s and 30s ribbon work is by ribbon widths. So of course you can measure ribbon widths using a ruler and everything else, but our tool number 36, which is part of the leaves and buds set, which comes with the Ribbonwork Flowers project book, does make it a little bit easier for you. So these squares are each standard ribbon widths. So for this particular style of calyx, we need 3.5 ribbon widths. So I can just measure up the square and say, yep, okay, this is this ribbon. So this is the box that I need. So there is 1. And then we're going to move along. There's 2. There's 3. And then I'll move this half notch over so that we now have a half. Okay, and I'm just going to cut out along there. These are really nice because they sort of finish off your flower quite nicely. Even if you're just going to secure your flower down onto something for traditional uses, like decoration, such as on hats or something, it's still nice to finish off the back of your flower. So I'm going to turn in more or less to the center. I can always sort of play around with this if I really want to get it sort of bang on the center. But that will do. It's not, you don't have to sort of stress it too much. I'm going to bring the needle in, the threaded needle in, leave a bit of a tail, and work a back stitch. I'm not at the edge of the ribbon. And so again, back to the back stitch so that I can make sure that that's nice and tight. Okay, now I'm going to work in a diagonal to the end of the ribbon. Now it doesn't matter which side you end on. Now fold over this other side, but you basically what you want to do is you want to make sure that your thread either comes up and over or down and over, but you're going over the edge of the ribbon. And then come back in on a diagonal. And again, over the edge of the ribbon. Diagonal again. Over the edge. Diagonal again. And then this time, come over the edge and back on, so that way you know that you've got all of the over edges. Now at this point you may wish to take your thread back through to what is the right side, so there's no fold. Okay, I'm just going to trim off this tail and then gather this up. Gather it up with the fold, the cut edges of the ribbon on the inside. Okay, and then that is going to fold up, and you see it's going to give you a little calyx to put the end of your flower into. Now if you want to wire your flower, at this point I would put wire probably right the way through here, pierce through the ribbon and then through to the bottom of the calyx. I'm not going to do that for this one. I'm just going to twist that round a little bit to give a little bit more structure, and I'm just going to pop that inside of there and continue to gather up that thread. At this point it looks a little bit crazy because we're losing some of the shape, we're squashing it in a bit, but that's all right. As long as you sort of keep on mind which is your slipper part, you should then be able to just stitch this along through that tail on the actual flower, so that you can stitch those two together. And as I say, even if you're stitching it down, it gives you a little bit of greenery, which is quite nice as well with your flower. So when you're making decorative trimmings, or really if you're using it for any decorative purposes, it still is nice to have that. So I'm just going to trim that off. Move my needle out of the way. And there is our basic lady slipper. We can do a little bit of manipulation with the calyx. Now, of course, that's lovely. It's quite flat though, so it's not got any of the sort of extra detail that we would want from an orchid, really. So now we're going to do a little bit of extra. So I've got a bit of water, and I'm going to use a little bit of acrylic paint. So let me just get a little pot here to put some acrylic paint into. And I am going to be using IndigoBlu's translucent acrylic paint. Now this one is Purple Rain, so quite nice and fitting. And I'm just going to put a little bit of this into my pot. The first thing I'm going to do is I just want to get some color down on these other petals, okay? And I want it to be really quite watery. So what I found works best is to really get mainly water down first, so that you can take a little bit of the paint and let it draw up. So you just use a bit of water, use a bit of paint, and just take it back and forth. Of course, you can do this really with any base ribbon. I mean, obviously these are water-based acrylics. You can heat seal them. Most acrylics you can actually heat seal, and they will be more permanent on fabric. So I would certainly, give it a gentle blast with a heat gun if you have one. If you are textiles and so therefore not into your paper crafting to have a heat gun, you could try blowing it with a hairdryer, just a little bit. Obviously be careful, it's polyester ribbon, and polyester will obviously melt with heat, so you do have to take care. Don't overdo it. But if you're just using this for decorative purposes, really, I don't think you need to worry too much. So, a bit of color, just to give it a bit more depth. Now the other thing So that's looking better by the moment. Now I'm going to take off a lot of that water and directly into the pigment. And then I'm going to just put little spots towards the center. Again, just to give it a little hint. Obviously, we're not going for something that's sort of super realistic. I'm sure that if you really wanted to, you could probably work quite hard to do that. But instead, to have something that is effective, resembling the flower, and so therefore a nice decorative element for any of your other work. So because that's still a little damp, then those dots sort of spread out a little bit. So just set that all aside so that I don't wreck everything, which I'm highly likely to do. I'm going to take the end of that pen and pull my slipper petal up a bit again because it got a little squashed. And whilst these side ones are a little damp, you can also sort of pull them and give them a little bit of extra shape because these often go off to the side, sometimes quite thinly in the English lady slipper. And there we have one little lady slipper flower. So you can go ahead and do decorative brooches, do these as embellishments. I mean, they'd look great stitched onto a bag or something. I've actually done a set of them as a brooch, so 3 of them, and I've used just ruched ribbon for the base to make a bit of a filler, which I have also colored with some of the same purple acrylic just to give a little bit more depth. So a nice little brooch. Or if you really want, pop it onto a wire. And as I say, that's a wire through. On this particular one, I've just wrapped around with ribbon, but you could use florist tape and go for a more precise finish to make an arrangement. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Do please click like and subscribe and leave me your comments. It's great hearing from you, it really is. Take care of yourselves and see you in the next one.